Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. My name's Reyes Anthony, and tonight, what happens when the Evangelifishes notice? And I found this to be a very fascinating interview or podcast. It is quality content from the Evangelifish world, because this is not really an ecosystem that we swim in at all, but it is one that should be on the radar. Bryce Crawford, very popular YouTuber. And I gotta say from the outset, as someone who's not very familiar with his content, I think the content potential on paper is pretty strong. I think it is very good content. And again, this is not a complete judgment of him or anything else, but I think it's very interesting to have a Christian apologetics type podcast with people who are across various different streams. Like the guys interviewed the Adam Page guy, who, if you're not familiar with that, he's interviewed him twice. And if you're not familiar with who that guy is, his wife is very famous on the OF side of things. So he's interviewed people who are in that industry. Very famous because he's the guy whose wife famously cucked him.
Okay, I mean it's not ringing any bells, but
that was
maybe
a huge
is. Maybe
thing.
that one. Maybe that one.
There's a lot of memes about that back in the day where he finally let his wife, do content with another man. Like that was a huge thing. His wife is Lena the Plug. Maybe that rings a bell. I don't know. Anyway, he's interviewed that guy. So he's interviewed all sorts of crazy characters on the internet. He seems to come from Hillsong adjacent world, like he loves Judah Smith and having him on. He just had David Platt on earlier this week, and David Platt, obvious false teacher, obvious wolf, to talk about eschatology, which not what you'd think you'd talk about David Platt with, not a David Platt expertise type of discussion. David Platt's all about getting you to, spend your children's inheritance so that people in Africa who refuse to grow their own food can eat for a day. Like, that's David Platt. Like, that's his specialty. That is what the back half of the book of Radical is about that mentality. But anyway, a lot to talk about in this interview that he did with Dan Bilzerian, who is an Armenian guy. He's not a Christian, and that is very apparent in the interview. Dan is not a Christian, and I'm not going to say that's okay, but he's not on that podcast because he is a Christian.
Yeah, he's on to present his objections and then have them, I guess, answered in a podcast format.
And again, maybe it's just to have a conversation. Like I think it is actually. I think the content is actually pretty decent. It's very Zoomer friendly, but so with that said, he brings him on, and Dan goes hard at, the title of the video is Dan Bilzerian Challenges Christianity, but the reality of the conversation is Dan Bilzerian challenges Judaism. Yeah, and that's what is fascinating. What happens when the Evangelifish is confronted with noticing? And that's what this conversation was. And let me just give Bryce Crawford a huge compliment. He is way more mature than Steve Dace on this issue. He does not try to struggle session Dan at all. He does not try to say that he's wrong. He doesn't really try to argue the facts, which I think is very interesting. He just is uninformed. And maybe this is the first time he's hearing it.
I mean, if I were to push back on that, I would say he kind of just resorts to giving almost canned apologetics responses.
We can get to that. But
so I think that it did kind of expose some of his, I won't say lack of knowledge or lack of familiarity with certain arguments or objections, but also his inability to really circumvent those objections. I think that's a common theme throughout the interview. But he does basically allow it to be admitted as evidence uncontested, but he does maybe do a couple caveats after that.
And maybe that's the Gospel Coalition type mentality of how do you reach people? It's like you meet them where they're at, and then you try to do the Jesus juke or whatever. And, there is a time and a place for that. And it would have been interesting how the church done that same thing with, when black people were saying they were being discriminated against in 2021 or 2020. It was like, oh, there's systemic racism. And the church was like, you go, girl. There's definitely systemic racism. But in this case, Dan Bilzerian, talks about who runs the OF industry that's aforementioned. And I don't really know the politics of that, but Jesus. It's interesting because obviously the church at large had different responses to each of these phenomenons, as they should have, but not exactly responses that they did have or are having, but because they're not the same. They're really just not the same. And body camera footage has shown that they are not the same.
Oh yeah, the body camera footage has certainly disproved all the narratives surrounding BLM.
Right. And the fact is, even going back to 2014 with Michael Brown, the police had to lie, or they had to lie about the situation. And that's why people rioted, because they didn't specify that the cop was actually responding to an active 911 call. Like, they lied about that. They made it seem like him getting the police interaction, the confrontation, was unrelated to him robbing a store. They made it seem like those were two separate events, that they were unrelated to each other. No, they were absolutely related to each other, and the police lied. But the grand jury had the full evidence. So, anyway, that's a digression. And what I just found fascinating about this conversation was he didn't try to struggle session Dan. Instead, he doesn't really have like adult answers.
No, I
And
thought that was
do you
consistent.
expect adult answers from Evangelifish world?
No.
Me personally, no. It's spiritual milk. And there's an audience that needs that. But he's also Hillsong adjacent. He dresses like a wigger. And it has to be brought up. He dresses like a wigger.
I mean, yeah, his physiognomy and aesthetics does need improvement. I understand he has like a Waffle House story, so that probably relates to the T-shirt.
Yes.
But at the same time, I mean,
it's a wigger T-shirt. Like, he could have gotten a regular T-shirt.
The direction of society now is probably not up towards casualness, but actually towards formality and more upscale aesthetic. So I think he needs to like get on the trend.
I mean, this podcast does have pretty high aesthetics. There's some bongs in the background, but anyway, I'm gonna get the part loaded. We're gonna go through a couple clips tonight. I think we're gonna go through 3 or 4 clips.
Well, let me point out who Dan Bilzerian is. I mean,
yes,
he is
you
the
should
son.
Do that.
He is the son of his father did like I guess investment banking and was a business owner in the fashion industry. He owns he at one point in time managed the Singer company, and his father did get indicted and convicted or pled guilty to securities fraud. And as far as Dan Bilzerian, he's kind of like I won't say he's somewhat followed in like the footsteps of his father in terms of certain questionable decisions, but he kind of made his name and fame in like the poker scene. So this goes back to 2008. He was he was like
professional gambler.
Yes, a professional gambler, though he amassed a lot of wealth. That's how he got on Joe Rogan. He talked a lot about poker. So he did do that. He did do some business dealings with it's called Ignite International Brand. So that's e-cigs, CBD oils, and basically a lot of that vice, let's just say. So, and he's done a couple movies, most notably Lone Survivor, the Equalizer, and Extraction. So he's done a lot of different things, and obviously he is most known for certain takes that he has.
And when you say movies, did he act in those movies, or is he like a producer or
he was in the movie. So yes, he was an actor, probably because, I mean, if you look at how he's built, you can kind of see they might need someone that can, let's say, competently do the stunt work, and that's why he's there. And that, I mean, if you look at those movies, I mean, I don't know the Equalizer, but certainly Lone Survivor and the and Extraction, it would make sense that they'd want someone that could look the part of like a Navy SEAL or Special Forces.
And he was in the Navy. That does come up in this interview. So anyway, let's dive in. We're going to go at 1.25 speed per usual, and this clip is about 6 minutes. I want to play this clip because this is just Dan Bilzerian truth bombing Bryce Crawford relentlessly for like 9 minutes, give or take. But we're in the middle of it. We're gonna do like a couple minutes, a little bit shorter segment. Like I said, the high aesthetics because we got like the bongs in the background. Anyway,
I think he was at a minimum, somebody that walked a perfect path. I mean, that is like the example, right?
Yeah.
The example is to do what you believe is right, even when there's going to be extremely negative ramifications, like you being nailed to a cross, right? So
Yeah.
it's easy to do the right thing when it's convenient,
Yeah.
or when it feels good, or when it's not going to, potentially cause your death.
Yeah.
The test comes when something is difficult. But I think that, look, I haven't read enough of the Bible to kind of like go through it line by line. I think there's some great quotes, and
For sure.
and I do think that it's absolutely worth reading, and I need to do more of that. But what I did look into was kind of the Talmud, the Jewish religion, and what their belief system is, because I don't think Christianity is the problem. Like, I think Christianity is good. And if you look at the Christian nations, their value systems, I think that is a good thing. And I think that's being eroded in America today. And I wonder why. And I start looking at like the why, these Christian values as a Christian nation, like why they're being eroded, why there's men in women's locker rooms, why men are beating up women, why it's, why drag queens are reading to children, why, you go into the schools and you see, children being encouraged to be transgender or homosexual. Like, that to me is an absolute attack on Christianity. What they did during the Olympics with their depiction of the Last Supper, like that was blasphemy. So I look at who's attacking this, and it's not the Muslims, not the Hindus, it's the Jews. They are attacking Christianity. They are the ones pushing this stuff in the media. They are the ones pushing transgenderism. And if you look at the root of this, Magnus Hirschfeld, he opened the first transgender clinic in the world, the history of the world. It was in Germany. So he did the first transgender surgery, and this was in the 1920s, the 1930s. So this is not some new progressive whatever. Like, they were doing the same shit 100 years ago. You look at the Talmud, it's got 8 different genders. So the Bible doesn't have that. The Quran doesn't have that. So where is this coming from? It is.
so I wanted to pause right there. So we just got this. The context is he just kind of explained that he's not a Christian, and because he believes that Jesus was a perfect man at a minimum. Just to be clear, he does set that as the floor. He's a little, what he doesn't fully acknowledge Jesus as God, which is the central claim of the New Testament. But he does at least begin the floor. He at least has a respectful floor, but obviously it's insufficient for belief in salvation. And then he's moved on to say Christianity in general is good. And then he brings up the history of transgenderism. And yes, he's absolutely correct about that. So obviously this is the first thing that he truth nuke, or not the first thing that he truth nukes Bryce Crawford with. But this is like the opening salvo to a very based monologue by Dan Bilzerian. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to this.
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of what he's suggesting is that, the Jews are involved in a lot of these heinous evils. I mean, to me, the easy apologetics answer to this is actually that because, their entire religious system is based on a rejection of Christ, this would lead to them perpetuating and even promoting the worst kinds of evils as a means of hating their hatred of Christ. That's all.
Right.
It all goes back to their hatred and denial of Christ. And again, that's before you get into the Talmudic teachings on the value between Jew and Gentile and the disparity that exists between that value. So that would justify such mistreatment which I believe he does get into. So I would definitely recommend he read the book by Israel Shelach that came out in like 2022 that talks a lot about this, so you can read it from the horse's mouth. But yeah, the Christian response, especially in an apologetics context, needs to be that because they do these things, this actually validates that Christianity is good and it is therefore true.
Because they built the Antichrist religion after Jesus' resurrection. It shows that, when you reject God, when you make an entire religion and culture built on rejecting God, the fruit are so rotten that even all the pagan, 109 nations, which according to, I think Dan Bilzerian talks later about how, each of these nations was like 10 times. They let him back in, they kick him out, they let him back in. He talks about that being a cycle. But, if all these different places come to the same conclusion, and it's like Aquinas uses the term witness people. Like, this evil is a witness. It's not a positive witness. It's not, a witness to, God saving, but it is a witness to what an entire culture built on rejecting God looks like. So,
and also just the ability to deceive God, because that's also the entire premise of the Talmud and so forth. Again, Jesus confronts this directly in the New Testament. So the notion that you can trick God with korban and all these other rituals, tithing the cumin. So those are just in there. So, but again, you have the answer right there, is that their transgressions and very transgressive behaviors indicate that Christianity is the ultimate truth. Like,
but he's about to go even harder. So
but
this is like the opening part, though.
But Bryce does not make that pivot. Instead, he does try to kind of equivocate.
We'll get to Bryce's answer. I got Bryce's clip next.
Coming from the Jewish religion. This degradation of moral fiber is coming from them. And so that's the big problem, and like, and people don't want to talk about that. You talk about that, and then all of a sudden your show gets canceled and you get silenced and this and that. And, and usually, you look historically, like the right side is never trying to silence people. They want to talk because they feel like their position is correct and they have the facts to back it up. And so I look at, like I said, where all this is coming from, and it's coming from the Jewish religion. And so that's where I've been. And I think the big issue here is that their religion preaches supremacy. The Christian religion doesn't preach that. Islam doesn't preach that. Christians want, other people to be Christians. Muslims want other people to be Muslims. Jews don't want other people to be Jews. Jews believe that they are chosen from God and that everybody else is beneath them, that they're literally like cattle. If you look at the Talmud quotes, like, non-Jews are like cattle. You can rape them, you can steal from them, you can kill them. Like, if you look at what they actually put in their Talmud and what they believe, it is absolutely unequivocally a religion of supremacy. And you look at how you treat animals like cattle. You're not going to treat a horse or a cow that you're going to eat the same as you're going to treat a human. So the problem comes from when they believe that they're better than everybody else. And, that has big problems. And you put on top.
Wow. Yes. And this is the same, you brought up that this is the same thing that Martin Luther argues.
Yes.
And it's very evident that, there's only one group of people that thinks they're the master race. And that is the argument that Dan Bilzerian makes. That's the argument largely that the Talmud makes. And it's kind of in the ethos. If you believe that you're a chosen people, and then you add on top of that a victimhood complex, you got a chosen people complex and a victimhood complex, and you're like radically materialistic. Like, there's all sorts of bad things that will come out of that.
No, I don't know if you'll get to it, but obviously he's talking about,
Well, we're gonna get up to him. We're not going to do him denying the 6 million.
No.
We're going to cut it off a little bit before that.
No, well, when you're talking about the, I guess the Jewish eschatology of the master race. That they even believe that like their version of the Messiah is the one that will get all the nations to enrich them materially and like bring the desires of the nations to them in Jerusalem, which means the desires of the nation being the wealth of the nations. So that's even in their eschatology. Now, again, Bryce gives a very bad exegesis on the Jewish, what the Pharisees expected their Messiah. They wanted a Messiah to enrich them personally. They weren't necessarily, in fact, they didn't want a Messiah to even overthrow Rome from the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because don't rock the boat. That's their money back. War is bad for business. Like, if anything, they wanted a Messiah that would enrich them personally, and Bryce does get that wrong.
That they've somehow weaseled their way into a victim category because of this, Holocaust that they, want everybody in the world to just consistently talk about. They don't talk about Christian Holocaust, by the way. They don't talk about the Bolshevik Holocaust, the Holodomor, the Armenian Holocaust, genocide, whatever you want to call it. In fact, in Israel, they deny all of those Holocausts, and they were all perpetuated by Jews, except for the Armenian one, which was, some say it was crypto Jews, whatever. Let's just say that was not Jews, but unequivocally, The Holodomor was, the Holodomor, the Bolshevik genocide, those were Jews killing Christians. Like 40,000 Christian churches were burned. Like they made it illegal to criticize Jews, and they were burning priests in the streets, in their churches, burning, congregations. Like they mass murdered like between 30 and 60 million Christians. And that was like a predominantly Jewish leadership. And some people will try and claim, oh, well, it wasn't all Jewish leadership. But you look at the people that said so. Churchill literally wrote Bolshevism versus Zionism, the struggle for the Jewish soul. And he talks very, directly about how the Bolshevik revolution, whatever you want to call it, was predominantly Jewish. And the people in the high positions were all Jewish. Communism was a Jewish theology that was written by Karl Marx. So you look at where all this stuff came from. This was Jews mass murdering Christians. And this was before World War II. Nobody talks about all these Christians that died. Half of my people got wiped off the face of the earth. Armenians are Christian. We got, and Israel denies that. They lobby the U.S. to deny that. So, they want everybody to talk about their Holocaust while at the same time being the biggest Holocaust deniers on the planet. And, the Holodomor was an absolute Holocaust of Christians, and Henryk Yagoda, he was he was in charge of the gulags, he was Jewish. So you look at the leadership and it was Jews killing Christians. That, it was a Jew that invented the mobile gas chamber before World War II.
That's where I wanted to end that clip because, I'm not trying to run afoul of the YouTube algorithm because he goes into the 6 million number next. But I think that is just an absolute banger from him when he talks about, hey, there were genocides perpetuated against Christians in the 20th century that are now forgotten. And one of the reasons why they're forgotten is because you can only teach so much history in public schools. So, and, public school curriculum doesn't really get to the 20th century anyway. So the only events in the 20th century that are taught are the Civil Rights Act and the Holocaust. Guaranteed that's what's taught in schools are those two events. And as far as any other event, no guarantee that it's taught in any school. So he's absolutely right. And good on him for saying it. And I think Bryce Crawford learned something there about, hey, there are genocides against Christians perpetuated. Why aren't these talked about? I don't know if you have any reaction.
I mean, you could argue Holodomor was pound for pound worse as far as period of time versus death count, the ascribed death count, I should say. So yeah, pound for pound, it was a worse event.
I mean, the Russians and the Chinese have the two largest genocides in world history. And then you would look at something like Pol Pot for the largest percentage, although apparently he's saying half of Armenians were killed in the Armenian Holocaust. But Pol Pot killed 25% of Cambodia, astronomically high.
And he does have Armenian citizenship, just for the disclosure.
Is he a dual citizen?
Yes, he actually is a dual citizen.
Whoa!
I think it's because he gave money to the right people and they gave him citizenship. So I think maybe a little bit more transactional, but he has been an advocate on behalf of Armenia.
And Armenia, they're currently getting ethnically cleansed, or were, because I think Trump brokered some sort of peace deal, and by the Azerbaijanis who were getting armed by the Israelis. So, it continues today.
So, when Jews talk about events, they always want to talk about what happened to them, and they never want to talk about.
All right, we're gonna skip ahead to Bryce.
You didn't want to let him say the line.
I did not want to
say the line, Bart.
Say the line. So we're actually gonna skip ahead to his response, which is 2 minutes later.
End negatively every time.
Yeah. So that very last thing you just said, pride, just the definition of pride is the curse of the world. No matter what ethnicity you have, right? I personally don't know a lot about the politics of Judaism and things like that. What I do know is that there's just flat out injustice in the world. It doesn't matter if someone did an eye for an eye or whatever. There's just flat out injustice that exists. And it's like murder. It's like if I came here and murdered you, I would deserve to go to jail. Punishment and justice is necessary for crime. Punishment and justice is necessary for injustice. And even all throughout Scripture, you see times where God is telling the Jewish nation of Israel do certain things, and they go, okay, and then they do the total opposite of what he tells them to do, and he doesn't let them slide.
Well, they think they can trick God. They think that they can transfer their sins into a chicken, swing a chicken around their head, and kill the chicken, and that's somehow going to trick God and absolve them of their sins. I mean, it's nonsense. Their whole...
that clip again. You brought up the tricking God thing earlier.
The
But
choking chicken ritual.
that was his first response to the JQ being brought up on the show, was that right there. Because again, he had like 9 minutes uninterrupted of monologue. I mean, it's pretty wild. This whole thing is wild, but you know.
And it is kind of like the canned response to the appeal to mass injustice in the world. The world's imperfect. Pride is the ultimate sin. Again, these things are all true, but
Well, I don't think all sin is pride. I don't think that's true.
Fair
enough. I think that's something that's brought up in apologetic circles, but it falls flat on its face as it does here. I mean, I think Dan Bilzerian is like personally impressed, but I don't think he's intellectually impressed by Bryce Crawford throughout this interview.
Yeah, I mean, he does seem like a very personable person and perhaps even likable in person. So I can imagine that, you could have a conversation with him, but he obviously, again, he doesn't necessarily have the experience with these types of arguments before, and it does show.
Right. And, part of it is, as a Christian, are you really objecting to what he's saying unless he's objecting to the divinity of Christ? And, there's no reason that a Christian should just be up in arms about what he's saying. What I do find interesting is, again, the guy just denied the 6 million number and does not get struggle session for it. And he didn't pretend to be like, I don't really know about the politics of that time period because that's the only time period that most people are familiar with, and not in a good way, but he doesn't try to say that. He doesn't try to struggle session about that. So at least give him credit that he's not struggle sessioning Bryce Crawford or Dan Bilzerian for questioning the 6 million number. He's not struggle sessioning him for that, but he doesn't really have a meaty response. Now, in the next part of the interview, I'm not even sure if I want to play it, but he goes on about Gomer in the Bible.
I mean, yeah, that was
what were your thoughts?
That was a horrendous exegesis. I mean, one, I could go into the whole Reformed view that a lot of reformers did not believe it was a literal event that happened, so to speak, that they did think it was teaching an allegory. There's also the view
that it was a vision.
Yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. That would be the more allegorical view, because they find it very contradicting that God would command someone to marry someone that the law would prohibit him from marrying. That's one view. Then there's the, I don't want to say telescopic view, but the idea is she became a prostitute, not necessarily that she started out as one. And then, of course, there is she was a prostitute the whole time, and the recurrent sin. But yeah, he basically makes it look like, oh yeah, she was sneaking out after dark to be a whore and turned some tricks, and then he would redeem her, and it was more of a cycle than it probably actually was. He probably omits the fact of the let's just say cuckoldry of Hosea
raising someone else's children.
Hosea raising I think 2 bastard childs, or illegitimate children, and 1 legitimate child. And obviously the story talks about the redemption, but he doesn't really point it back to the church or point it back to Israel, or even say that you, Dan Bilzerian, are Gomer. He doesn't even make that pivot. So it is a bad exegesis all around, and his exegesis throughout the interview, I would say, was very poor. But that one was noted.
Come on, he exists in the Judah Smith camp. We got to at least show him a little bit more mercy on this, right?
But I mean, he doesn't even make the necessary pivots that you might make in an apologetics conversation. Is that he is Gomer. You are the whore. Thou art the man.
Instead, Dan Bilzerian kind of flips it back on him, and
he basically
kind of goes into a manosphere talking point about, he shouldn't have done that, or it's not cool. Because Dan Bilzerian does have a problem with the Old Testament. And I think, to Bryce Crawford's credit, I thought he did decently enough objecting to the parts about gold, silver, and materialism that Dan Bilzerian criticizes in the Old Testament. So Dan Bilzerian criticizes the fact that the temple talks about how much gold there is and how much is given and how wealthy it is. But to Dan's credit, he does acknowledge, yet hey, the moral of the story of Solomon is not that polygamy is good. It's that he had everything that he could ever want, and it was not satisfying, which relates to his story as a rich playboy that found hedonism unsatisfying.
Yeah, and that was actually a very good moment.
For Bryce.
But I do wonder how familiar he is with Stoicism, because I do think maybe Bilzerian has a little bit of Stoic tendencies. He has a little bit of a Stoic belief system. I think that was one area, that one silo, maybe all the J stuff got in the way, but he did not necessarily address. Like, I wonder if this guy's read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And
If I had to guess, probably, because he
Yeah.
also quoted Plato later on, so he's done some reading.
So, I mean, I think I would have wanted to see what his thoughts on Ecclesiastes would be, because that's generally one that a lot of Stoic types would gravitate towards. So, I mean, again, that maybe that just comes from a lack of experience in apologetics, but I think you want a little bit of a missed opportunity not to maybe pivot more into the Stoicism route. I mean, maybe the J
But the
stuff is just
internet
that.
and the algorithms demand the JQ. Let's be real. What's going to get more people talking about the podcast is the 9-minute monologue, and then we also have another one towards the end that clocks in just over 5 minutes that I think I want to pivot to, because I kind of don't want to go through the slog of the Gomer part.
I mean, we
Because
pretty much summed it up. I mean, he basically turns it into married the OnlyFans girl struggle session. From
yes, he
certain,
does, and that's why I
a
say
lot of
that
them are
Dan
friend-
turns it.
a lot
Dan
of them
turned
are
that
friend-
in. Yeah,
but
Dan used the Manosphere talking points, and that's
yeah, I mean, again,
kinda what I'm
the
saying.
point isn't that you should go out, marry the whore, and like redeem her from society and all that stuff. The point is that you are the whore, and I mean, you wouldn't do something that ridiculous, but God did that ridiculous thing for you. Again, he did fail that to basically say that you should marry the OnlyFans model. He basically kind of turned it into that discussion.
Right, which is why I don't think Bryce's using that as an example was particularly a good idea.
Oh, I
Like,
think
that was a weird example to go to, I thought. Because again, what was the question? It was about, I guess, modern Jews. But anyway, I don't know why he thought to go into that direction. So we're gonna skip ahead because I don't want this podcast to go on forever. We're gonna go ahead towards the 59-minute mark in this podcast, and
the 1 hour mark is very interesting.
this is very interesting
in some way. So, but at the same time, I don't think that kind of addresses to me what I feel like is a Jewish problem that we have in America. I mean, look, people aren't getting married. Like, it's more than half of people 30 years old and under haven't had sex in the last year. There's like the small segment of women that's, making all this money selling their bodies online. Like, porn is at an all-time high. I mean, all the
Right.
Jewish sites, or all the sites, are owned by Jews. Hub, OnlyFans, all this stuff. Like, every one of these porn sites is all owned by Jews, and porn is illegal in Israel.
But you look at like crazy stuff like that. I think that's the main thing that gets me going, right? I'm like, just in general, there is wickedness, perversion, pride, selfishness rampantly rising throughout the entire world.
But if it's coming from one group predominantly, at what point do you address that?
Well, I think it's hard to say it's just one people group, right? Because then
I'm saying predominantly. I'm not saying all, but like 90-something% of the porn sites are owned by Jews. They're
Sure.
like they're like a fifth of 1% of the population.
But if I think this is for me where the grace and mercy aspect comes. So like you said something earlier, you were like talking about trust, like levels of trust. I agree. Like, I can look at Dan and say, hey, I love you unconditionally. Like, I know we just met, but if you said you needed something or called me and I could do it, I would do it because I love you unconditionally. But because we just met, there's a certain level of trust that you and I have where it's like we're kind of opening up, kind of talking about, but there's some things that you and I wouldn't share versus.
Can I just say this point about unconditional love is just even jellyfish nonsense? Because I first of all hate the term unconditional love because I don't think it's a real concept. There's self-giving love, and that is far more along the lines of what agape actually means. Is a more self-giving love. Charity is one translation of that. It is not unconditional love, like love without conditions. Unconditional love, kind of hearkening to Japan's unconditional surrender, even though it was conditional upon them keeping their emperor. But nevertheless, it's just one of these terms that's thrown out as unconditional love because I think honestly because of the World War II connection, but it's not real. There are conditions to God's love. Like he had to die and atone for your sin and justify you. That is a condition upon which the love is received and given. Just saying. Little bit of a pet peeve, but it is the evangelifish mindset to throw out terms unconditional love in somewhat of a disordered fashion.
And again, another moment where he's maybe doing a little bit of a canned response. I don't remember if this is the Matthew 18 section or not, but his exegesis on Matthew 18 was also pretty bad.
I don't think it was. I don't remember the Matthew 18 section, to be honest.
Oh, that was the one where he basically said Peter was talking about Matthew directly and saying, how many times can I forgive this guy for being a tax collector?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember.
So that was such a horrible reading of the text that is not in there at all.
These guys that came with me, they're my roommates and my best friends, and we all work together. So there's like a level of trust that I have with them. And so that's the grace and mercy, right? Grace is a free gift that you and I don't deserve. So yes, essentially you and I should both be atoning for our sins. That's the grace of God, is he does something that we don't deserve. And then mercy is withholding what we do deserve. And I think
I don't disagree with that, but I'm saying as it relates to the Jewish question, this has been something I've been struggling with for like the last 2 years, because like I said, ever since I started speaking out against Israel, I've been attacked by this community, which made me then look at that community. And the more I look, you know what I describe it as? I'm like, there's no way it's this bad. And then I'm right. Like, it's not that bad. It's way worse. And then I look into something else and I'm like, there's no way it's this bad. And once again, I'm right. It's not that bad. It's actually way worse. And over and over and over again, I keep seeing this and this pattern. And I feel like at some point it becomes very difficult to ignore. And I think this to me was one of those tests where it's like, it's cost me hundreds of millions of dollars. It's got me kicked out of in my company. It's obviously like uncomfortable to be speaking negatively about a group that has such a powerful influence. So like this has been almost nothing but a net negative for me, but I believe that it's the right thing to do because so many other people agree with what I'm saying, but they're scared to talk about it.
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate with you for a second.
Please do.
If you believe that predominantly they're doing something so wrong and so intense, what if the response is not necessarily to speak out against it? What if it's like, I'm trying to give an example, like I know you're not a Christian, but I'm saying like to pray for them.
By the way, so.
To pray for them. You have this instance where you have Peter and Matthew, disciples of Jesus, and Matthew was a tax collector. The Roman government hired a Jew to take money from Jews, and they would always take extra money because the extra money was their salary. So they were just basically stealing from their own people. So Peter hates Matthew because he's like, you're the dude that was taking all my money. But both of them are following Jesus, and Peter tells Jesus, he says, look, I can't forgive this guy. I just can't forgive him. He did it too many times, and I can't forgive him. And Jesus says, I've forgiven him 7 times. 7 was a number of perfection, Jewish law, 7 times. He goes, okay, forgive him 70 times 7. And he's like, so I'm supposed to give him, 400. And he said, no, 70 times 7, perfection times perfection. Because it doesn't matter how, I've never murdered someone, right? But Jesus says, if you look at someone with anger in your heart, you've basically committed murder against them. Now, again, they're ethically and morally different. Like if I'm just angry at you versus like if I murdered someone, obviously, morally, the murder is far significant than anger. But what Jesus is trying to make a claim here is saying like, look, instead of having this heart posture of always coming against people, if we have the heart posture to pray and forgive and allow our heart posture to motivate us and encourage us to pray for these people and love them in that way, because love doesn't...
I feel like we've been doing that. I feel like we've been doing that for the last 70, 80 years, and look at how it's worked out for us. Like our country is in decline. We've never been more divided. It's blacks against the whites. It's Democrats against Republicans. It's like, it's not really, but that's what we think. Like the right is like, oh, it's these idiot leftists, but really it's the Jews giving them these talking points. They're the ones that are telling these people. They didn't just all wake up one day and say, hey, men should play in women's sports and children should be able to chop off their penises and take hormones. It's just like all this nonsense. Like 10 years ago, we would have been like, that's obviously ridiculous. Like,
that right there is an exchange.
Yeah, I mean, again, that was the horrible exegesis of Matthew 18 I alluded to. So this was the section of that, and yeah, it is horrible. Again, it's not a personal beef between Peter and Matthew that is the underlying premise of Matthew 18.
So let's talk about what exactly is going on here, just to set up broader context for the entirety of the discussion. He has tried a couple of things. He has said turn the other cheek, so they've had that discussion. Why not just turn the other cheek? Now he's like, why not just pray for them?
Yeah, I mean,
and then he's also said something along the lines of, Let God be the judge. God will deal with it in the afterlife. So the turning the other cheek thing, as Dan Bilzerian pointed out in the discussion, does not apply when someone is harming other people and you are there to stand in the way of that. It does not apply. And the argument that they go on to is like if someone's going to be an active shooter at a McDonald's. So that's kind of the example that's given. So, and that's alluded to at the end. So we'll
I don't
have
know if we want
the
to
final
go.
clip of that.
Yeah, I don't know if we wanted to do that before I go on to my response on the whole turn the other cheek.
No. So I'm just laying out what Bryce Crawford has said throughout the conversation as like, how should Christians, what is the Christian response to this question, also known as the JQ? And he's given turn the other cheek. He is given pray for them and their souls. And he is given let God be the judge in the afterlife.
But he's also saying pray for them, but don't even speak up on the issue.
Yes.
So he's basically, and again, he'll make the comparison of the ostrich sticking its head in the sand, but that's basically, that is the big Eva approach. Oh, don't talk about the elephant in the room. Have you prayed for them instead, or have you actually decided to have a coffee with them? Because that was a huge thing. Just why don't you sit down and have a coffee with them? Well, I mean,
but here's the thing: a Christian's unwillingness to call out evil is a witness to the other people who noticed the same evil. The Christians who went woke with the church, with the left, with the dumb NAACP, the Christians who adopted Black Lives Matter, or softly adopted it, that was a witness against the church. And people who were not woke said, why are all these Christians going woke if they're supposed to stand with the truth? If Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, why are all these Christians, saying Black Lives Matter is a gospel issue?
Yeah, why are all these?
That's a witness.
Why are all these Christians helping immigrants displace white people from their communities and like inviting immigrants to their country and like helping them out or helping them pass through the Mexican border?
Yeah,
that's the Southern Baptist Convention, for the record. We did the article on Send Relief doing that at the border. Yeah, like that. That's that is that the Christian response is literally helping hostile people enter your country.
Yes, and these things are terrible witnesses, and intentionally so. They're done by false teachers who want to infiltrate and subvert the church. And one of the ways to subvert the church is to import a bunch of third worlders who are pagans. It's basically trying to get an entire nation to neglect the first commandment. So all these H-1B visas bringing in Hindus, what's that going to do to the first commandment? Oh, now they're erecting huge idols. There's a second commandment.
And then you'll get the Bryce response of, well, now we have an opportunity to share the gospel with them.
They're bringing the gospel to us, or we don't have to go to their foreign lands. They're coming to our lands, and we can share the gospel. It's international missions, but cheaper. And that has largely been the church's response. And people see this. They see that it's evil, and they see the Christians doing nothing about it. They're not even speaking up. And that is a terrible witness.
It's worse. They'll punish you if you say, "I don't want my children to grow up in India. I want them to grow up in Texas."
Exactly. Churches are struggle sessioning members who dare speak out against liberalism, and it's a disgrace. And Bryce Crawford, I don't even know how old he is. Obviously, he's younger than me, and he has the Justin Bieber thing going on, even though he's like a. Was he even around for Justin Bieber to be a thing when he was a thing? Or did he just get
he does seem like he went down a similar path.
No diddy, right? But anyway.
Well, maybe without that part. But anyway. He did have he did have certain ideations of self-creation, so maybe there was something involved there. I don't know.
And I'm not trying to discredit Bryce Crawford's salvation or anything like that. But it is a testament that he lives and operates in megachurch Christianity. And megachurch Christianity interacting with the Jewish question is very fascinating to watch. But it also shows, hey, megachurch Christianity has like zero answers.
No, he is resorting to very canned responses. I mean, maybe not to like besmirch.
But even with his credit to at least his response, his canned answers aren't woke.
Yeah,
Hard
I
to
mean,
go
to his
woke.
credit, yeah, he's not struggle sessioning. He's not necessarily even disputing the facts. He is trying to do like a Ray Comfort style pivot. So, I mean, again, that does seem to be like his tactic, which is why a lot of the comment section is saying that it's like they're talking past each other, or he's not necessarily responding to the conversation that's being.
Remind me, we'll talk about the comment section at the end, because again, the Evangelifishes are noticing, and that's actually pretty interesting. It's fascinating. Like I got my goggles on and I'm just or binoculars, and I'm just watching this, and it's fascinating because people notice in real life too, and it's fascinating to watch other people bring up foreign influences in conversation. I didn't bring it up. They don't know my views, but then they bring it up, and it's like, okay, well, I can, and I can contribute and maybe gently nudge someone in a base direction. But anyway, let's skip ahead. We're gonna go to our last clip, which is a little bit further along. It is kind of nearing the end of the podcast, so we're going at the 12-minute mark.
Acquired nukes illegally. So you've got this rogue terrorist country, Israel, that's acquired, around 300 nukes, and they have the Samson option, which is if they feel threatened, they're just going to indiscriminately shoot nukes at everybody in the world. So you've got the biggest terrorist country in the world, and we are just completely backing them no matter what. And I'm telling you, there's going to be consequences. And I just don't believe that the pacifist route is correct. I think the pacifist route is easy. It's easy to just like take the ostrich approach and just bury your head in the sand and just be like, oh, well, God is going to sort it out. But to me, I feel like you're skirting the test. I think the test is like, are you going to stand up to the bully? Because that's the hard thing. Are you going to go tackle that guy in the McDonald's that has a gun when you don't have a gun? That's the act of courage, not just like, oh, well, I'm going to turn the other cheek and God will figure it out. Like, no, I think that if you have the ability to protect people that don't have the ability to protect themselves, i.e. Palestinians, I think that you've got a moral obligation to do that. And that's why I've been, speaking out, because I have a platform to do it. So I feel like I have an obligation to do it.
Yeah, I don't think Christians, the Bible speaks out against passivity. It speaks out against laziness and passivity. I'm not trying to be passive. I don't know a lot about the politics that you know about, so I'm just not saying anything because I don't want to speak on something that I don't know a lot about. Yeah. But from a macro, broad perspective, and I think I'm just going to close with this since you gave us a little extra time, is like, I believe as a Christian that Jesus Christ is the antidote to the sickness of the world from a high scale and a low scale. And what I believe God has planted in my heart is to get this message out to everyone as possible as I can, is the love of God can forgive you of your wickedness and empower you to repent and stay as far away from wickedness as possible. The love of God doesn't compromise. When Jesus is hanging out with the tax collectors and the prostitutes and the sinners, he's not sitting there endorsing their behavior. He actually says, well, the healthy don't need a doctor, the sick do. These people need to understand that they need to turn from their ways. When I was 17, I became a Christian when I was 17. But I grew up in the church. I went to a private Christian school all my life. And to me, Jesus was just the guy on my Bible quizzes and tests. That's all he meant to me. But I had porn addictions.
Then he gets into his personal testimony, which I don't think we necessarily need to get into. But as you can see, like, he gives 3 responses kind of to the Jewish question, which is turn the other cheek, let God sort it out, which is the one that's most referenced at the end, and pray for them, right? So we've explicitly seen 2 of those, but I think all 3 we've seen referenced in these things, and it's just very fascinating that there's not really a response. He doesn't really question the facts at all. Again, very fascinating that he doesn't do that.
I mean, that's behavior that you'll get the call for not questioning the facts or pushing back on.
I mean, Bryce Crawford could get canceled for this. Actually, I'm very curious. I don't think
it'll get that harsh just because of like.
Is it because he doesn't have to deal with Reformed church ladies of both sexes?
I'm going to say yes, but also because a lot of that energy was wasted on or blown on Tucker Carlson. So it's like, where's the energy? Like the pressure, the pressure is already kind of expended.
Yeah, this is about 10 days old. This video is, give or take.
So, but I mean, even if you wanted to, again, the problem with his whole turn the other cheek thing is that, there's a difference between inimicus and hostilis. So when it's talking about turn the other cheek, it is probably talking more about an inimicus situation, which basically just means non-friendly or unfriendly. It's someone that's like your foe, but like more on a personal level. A hostilis is someone that basically wants to kill you, generally speaking, a foreigner. So the treatment, like when Jesus says, love your enemies, it is, and again, the Latin Vulgate is where this kind of is more clear, is that it's inimicus. not hostilis. It's not saying love the invader of your country that wants to rape your women and steal your jobs, deprive you of your home, dispossess you from your land, and basically take your money and kill you and your family. It's not talking about that. It's talking about an amicus, someone that's unfriendly with you. So, I mean, again, that's a major distinction. A lot of Christians don't really realize that, even though it is the historical understanding, because that is the Latin Vulgate.
All right, so let's dive into the comment section of this video. Because let's just see what's at the top. I used to really not like Dan Bilzerian. I was wrong. The host has no reply other than preaching, laughing at that. Jesus was anti-genocide. Let's see. Bryce drank 10 energy drinks while Dan spit facts on Judaism and Israel. Let's see. I hope Jesus comes back soon. Couldn't agree more as a Muslim. Interesting. Bro, I felt like I just watched two different podcasts. So that's, two talking past each other. Dan came with some elite ball knowledge of the Jews. That is pretty good. The good little sports metaphor there. Bryce getting red pilled before GTA 6. That's a reference to GTA 6 taking forever to come out. But yeah, obviously, Bryce is too green for this conversation. Need to do another one in 10 years. Wow, really felt like two people having two completely different conversations. I've never seen people talk past each other so much. And that's on the host of the podcast. That's not on the guest.
And again, it does have to do with some of the canned responses and perhaps even just like a misunderstanding of like where his worldview is. Because I mean, I alluded to the Stoicism. I mean, he also believes in works-based salvation, more or less. Like he does believe that your good deeds outweigh your bad deeds.
Dan does, not
Dan, yes.
Bryce, to be clear.
So that was another little rabbit hole he doesn't quite address, because he did believe that, he did express that numerous times throughout the podcast, that he thinks God will sort it out, that we all have like a divine, we're all like with God, or that we're our own toughest judge was one of his, like, to paraphrase him, that was one of his arguments or beliefs.
And he says, comment section only 2025 could have produced this duo. Bryce can learn something here about the real world. Dan can learn something here about the spiritual world. That's, again, very true. Let's see. Muslim spam. Props to Bryce for posting this and not cutting up a bunch of it. Truth being spoken by both sides. This is a very popular comment, it is 2.1 thousand likes. Dan challenges Christianity X. Dan challenges Jews. Check. Like, the title of the video was wrong, is basically what that's saying. So, again, that's like the most popular comment that I've seen. The fact that this video couldn't have been titled Dan Bilzerian challenges Judaism precisely proves every point mentioned. Who's in charge? The person you're not allowed to offend. Another one. I don't know if Bryce realized, but what Dan was saying actually validates his beliefs more, and is basically explaining why Jesus is the way more than anything.
I mean, that's in line with a lot of what I was saying towards the beginning, is that, like, their behavior actually validates Christianity as truth.
Yes. If Christianity and Christ is the ultimate good, a religion built on rejecting Christ will be the ultimate bad, will be the ultimate baddie. And, their persecution of Christians, I would say, the oldest persecutor of the faith, but also spiritually, because I don't think genetically it's the same, but spiritually it's still the same. Still the persecutors, even in the United States, Merrick Garland arresting people for praying. That was him. You'll never guess his early life section. Anyway, you got someone asking for a prayer request. Bryce is so patient, I can't even lie. Fruit of the Spirit for real. Again, Bongs in the back of this was crazy. Bryce has pureness of innocence, but is also young and naive. Respect to the warrior spirit in Dan Bilzerian. Get Nick Fuentes on, so they got a request.
That would be funny.
I don't know if I've ever seen a conversation quite like this. Both men speaking 100% undeniable facts while speaking from 100% different perspectives. Incredible.
I wouldn't
God
call
works
that
in
100.
truly.
I wouldn't call that 100% both
Yeah.
ways. That Gomer, that was a very movie version, a cinematic version of Gomer. Let's just say.
And then they're going to take this video down this video because Dan is spitting truth. So those are some of the comment sections, and it's just fascinating. The normie evangelifishes are ready to notice. They are ready. They're ready for this. You might not think they're ready for this, but I think Bryce Crawford showed the world and proved they are ready for this. They're not going to follow Mark Driscoll and Jack Hibbs down the pathway of dispensationalism. They're not going to do that. And that's something to be, very thankful for. So you love to see that. Love to see that. So I can't even remember how I found this gem of a video, but I stumbled across it and I'm like, whoa.
I mean,
Bryce Crawford is speaking at the conference that Allie Beth Stuckey is speaking at next year. So that name's been on my radar at least a little bit. The one that she's being a female pastor at.
No, what was it called? It had some stupid name.
Be Bold.
Be Bold, yes.
So he's speaking at that conference as well. He's
Not
also
really the
lower rung
boldest.
on the thing. But I'm pretty sure I've also seen that his podcast is pretty high on the Christianity charts.
I mean, he had good metrics on his channel. I'll give him that. I mean, he seems like he has a good operation. Now,
like I said in the beginning, on paper, it's good content. It's good content. Like, I kind of have in mind to do more controversial interviews in the future. We'll see. It is White Knight November, so we'll see if I can get someone on next week to capitalize on that. But because again, it was kind of had to do with the I think in conservative media, doing a daily show, you'll tap out at like 7 million subs on YouTube. You'll tap out. You can't just do a daily show. You got to do something a little bit more interesting. That's what people want. And that's why I think Tucker Carlson's going to outpace and surpass Ben Shapiro probably next year in YouTube subs. Anyway, I'll write that article later about I think Ben Shapiro's channel is cooked, or I think his whole thing is cooked. But anyway, I'll do a last call for questions.
I will say, while we wait for any questions, there's an excellent point in the interview where he talks about certain satanic killings that were practiced in certain parts of the world by a certain group of people. Yes, there's a lot of historicity to those claims. Mr. Jay Burden has done a podcast on a certain killing with a certain gentleman named Thomas that takes place in the Pale Settlement, and it is exactly in those in that sort of sphere of influence. Obviously, I think Candace Owens insinuated that a certain Leo Frank committed certain there was some occultic elements to that case. And as a third example, the man named Martin Luther did write about this same subject. So he actually does bring that up in the interview of like certain like very heinous crimes committed by these people around the time of Passover. I think that's the blood libel claim. But yes, that the interview was, I was very shocked that he brought that up.
Okay. I saw a question in the beginning. It's like, how many Jews were killed in the Holocaust? I want to struggle you for real.
I mean, Rushdoony said 1.25 mil.
Whoa. Is he canceled?
Theonomy bros, where you at?
Some of the Theonomy bros are like anti-Christian nationalist, and
that was my favorite part of that chapter because that's on the 9th commandment. But I did think the overall chapter was rather weak.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He just asked.
But he did cook on. He did cook in that one moment. He did cook.
But I don't actually know the number, but I think that the number 6 is like significant for modern Jews because it's the number of man. And that's why the Star of David, Star of Rephaim, which is probably what it actually is, also brought up by Dan Bilzerian. It's basically 666, in a symbol. I can't think of another way to make the 666 into a physical symbol. Honestly, I think in Revelation, it's a spiritual mark of the reprobate, but Christians have the helmet of salvation. They have the mark of the beast. Let's see. Ray, have you read the book The Gap is Not a Theory by Jack Langford? No, I do not. I have not read that book. Odds are, if you ask me if I've read a book, it's probably no. He does way more of the reading.
I mainly
put it
read
that
Dead
way.
People, for the record.
Yeah, he does way more of the reading. I read bad books. Like, man, what do I have? I got In Defense of Israel. I have How to End Christian Nationalism. I got David Platt's Radical up here as well. Like, I read the bad books. 6 or 7 is too high. You know what? If you don't believe that it's more than 6, then you might be a denier. Anyway, great time tonight. Again, I find this whole thing to be a gem. Like, it is interesting to document, hey, what happens when the Evangelifish crowd is hit with this? And turns out they are ready for it. They're ready for it. Don't be afraid to let the truth be known. And again, it affirms the Christian testimony that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. It really does. Like you brought up earlier, it really affirms everything we believe. Instead of doing the whole, we got to worship them and worship them to heaven, which doesn't, instead of, the John Hagee message is we got to worship them to hell. And that doesn't work evangelistically. That sends a bad witness. And it hasn't helped the church grow. I wouldn't say, but missiology is a tricky thing. So anyway, that's all we got for tonight. Have a blessed day. Stay based. Christ is King, and we will catch you on the next one.